Does studying economics tend to make people more selfish?
Maybe self-interest is not necessarily greedy. Self-interest is not necessarily selfish in the sense of not caring about other people. That maybe by maximizing my self-interest, I'm actually doing things okay for the rest of the world.
Some places have laws that say in the wake of a natural disaster, like a hurricane or a typhoon or an earthquake, vendors may not increase the price of basic supplies, such as bottled water, batteries, flashlights, gasoline for people's cars. Now, there are disagreements about whether these laws are a good idea. What do you think about anti-price gouging laws? Should shop owners be free to raise prices in the aftermath of a hurricane for bottled water, let's say? Or should the law prevent that? Alex?
Price gouging laws are a type of robbery in a way.
Robbery?
If I'm a shop owner and I can sell a bottle of water for $30 and that's where supply and demand match,
right.
Why should I be forced to sell it for $3?
Emily?
If you prevent a store owner from raising the price in a time when demand has skyrocketed, then you're not allowing the market to reach the new equilibrium.
And the reason you don't want to force them to keep it at the low price is what exactly? Is it because you agree with Alex that you're robbing the shop owner of the increased profit to which he or she is otherwise entitled?
I wouldn't say robbery. I would say that if you prevent the shop owner from taking advantage of this market opportunity, then you're sort of restricting their ability to maximize his profit.
And there it's a matter of life and death. And then there's a further, the economist argument, the person who's willing to pay for it. Well, the person who's willing to pay the most is the richest. And so are we at that point saying, the person who deserves to live is the richest person. And the other guys don't have the money, so rather than dividing the water among everybody, and let's say everybody could live, that one guy says, well, I happen to really like not feeling even a little bit thirsty.
Right.
I think most of us would say that's immoral, that we are at that point allocating the right to live by the price system.
So when they have these price gouging laws, as some states do, that say you can't raise prices of water or gasoline or of hotel rooms in the wake of a natural disaster. Is that something that you would be in favor of, anti-price gouging laws?
Yes, we're asking, should we subject the right to live to the market mechanism? I feel very strongly we should not. I think there's some economists who probably say, oh no, don't interfere with the market.
Right.
But
You're happy to, in this case.
In that case, clearly.
That's a mistake, because I think what it does is it ends up giving the goods to people who are lucky enough to show up early at the store before the store runs out. Whereas if the price rose to equilibrate supply and demand, the people who showed up early might buy some, but they'd also be incentivized to conserve.
So if a gallon of bottled water costs $2 normally, and after the hurricane knocks out all the safe water supply, it goes up to $50 a gallon or $100 a gallon. That's not morally objectionable?
You really need a very big incentive for people to come in and bring in bottled water. So you want the guy in the neighboring state to get in his car immediately, fill it up with bottled water from his tap, and drive to wherever the hurricane is. $50 would do that. Whereas forcing people to stay at $2, you're just gonna have a lot of very, very thirsty people.
Do you think it's a mark of bad character that the shop owner is taking advantage of the desperation of the customers when he puts the price of a $2 bottle of water to $50 or $100? Isn't that being greedy?
Well, I think it's being self-interested. I don't like the term greedy. Economists usually use the term self-interested, and we assume that most people are self-interested in their behavior.
Do you think there's no difference between self-interest and greed?
Maybe greed is self-interest when it leads you to do morally repugnant things.
In the shopkeeper pursuing his self-interest by charging $50 or $100 for the water, isn't that morally disreputable, even if practically efficient?
This is behavior that's going to be better for this society because more water will come in, there'll be less thirsty people. If it's socially desirable, it's hard for me to call it morally repugnant. Once I realize it's socially desirable, the first impulse of thinking it's morally repugnant has to be questioned.
we do make an agreement that self-interest does exist in a lot of parts of a market society, but we don't necessarily have to allow that to infect everything. It's true, I understand the point of trying to be logical about markets, but I mean, what we're really saying is that, you know, if a poor single mother comes into a store that's open during a natural disaster and says, I just need a couple of bottles of water before we can get out of here,
which is self-interest.
that's survival.
All that is looking out for yourself as a person who requires a
But
good.
is there not some more important essence of supplying your own kids as opposed to charging $50 for that bottle of water and putting that profit straight into a yacht?
One of the arguments for letting the market govern the allocation of water after a natural disaster is the efficiency argument, that it will provide an incentive for distant suppliers to undertake costs, to ship in more water, and that'll make even those who are suffering better off. Then there's another argument, questions of fairness, of what's right. There's a worry about fairness to those who can't afford to pay the inflated price for what is, after all, a basic necessity. And there's another argument about fairness on the other side, which is Alex's, that it's somehow unjust to prevent this shop owner from making as much money as the demand will permit. Let me ask you, Alex, why is it that the shop owner is morally entitled to whatever profit demand for water makes possible?
Well, I believe it's for a very simple reason. You're entitled to the fruits of your labor. If you can make more fruits from your labor,
No, but wait
you're
a
entitled
minute.
to them.
Why isn't it just a matter of good luck that suddenly the shop has a big supply of water and there was a hurricane?
Even if it's a matter of good luck, why is someone else entitled to expropriate my profits from this? Why wouldn't someone else be entitled to taking all the money that, for example, Mark Zuckerberg makes? Because it's also luck. He was lucky to come up with the idea to make Facebook. And
let's focus on the demand that suddenly spiked for water because of the hurricane. Demand is a fickle thing, isn't it?
it is.
And the demand for my product or yours or the shopkeeper, that's not our doing, is it?
It is not.
No.
If the demand for what I do or you do happens to spike due to an act of nature or an act of God, why am I entitled to reap the benefits that go with that? To me, good luck.
Because you're lucky. Because it happens that you're the person who's lucky and reaps the fruits of those benefits.
Okay, Matthew.
I guess I'll challenge the assumption that we're basing our argument against the laws on an entitlement to profits. To enforce and intervene and set the price at a lower level would be to impose a social obligation to market institutions, which aren't their purpose. Their purpose is to be selfish and to obtain the prices that the market will get them.
And when you say that the purpose of markets is to be or to register selfishness,
Yeah,
why is that the purpose of markets?
because that's the most economically efficient way to allocate goods.
Why does efficiency matter?
Because it's about how people receive goods and transact, and in the long run, that increases productivity.
So it is a utilitarian argument. In the long run, it maximizes productivity and therefore, presumably, the general welfare.
Right.
And that's the case fundamentally for markets and for letting markets proceed unimpeded.
Well, you can't just randomly impose an obligation to society in markets when it didn't exist before, just because an emergency happened.
Nicole?
Well, you don't want to impose a social obligation. Well, imposing selfishness as an obligation is the same thing, you know? Saying that profit is good, that's the goal. Like you're still imposing a goal on a business. You know, you're assuming that that is their goal, and it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. And also, it's only efficient in the sense that you think that this system is actually allocating the greatest amount to the greatest number. And what if that's not actually the natural order of things?
You're saying that, you know, it's designed to be selfish, but at the same time you're saying it's designed to be selfish because it provides a social function. So we're saying that the justification is a social function, and if the purpose is a social function, then aren't we willing to impose certain rules about how we curtail and move that social function?
But the social function that they agreed to when they entered the marketplace was to be selfish. It wasn't to assume responsibility for the rest of society.
But people do businesses for all sorts of reasons.
I'm just actually offended by the idea that anybody is bringing in even the notion of selfishness into markets. I don't think anyone who provides a service to someone, even though they put a price on it, to associate that with being selfish, the business owner is providing the water. I don't think that's selfish. The selfish thing would be if he were to hoard it himself and not give it away to anyone. I don't think that selfishness comes into any argument here. Just as I don't think that the shop owner is morally obliged to provide anything.
I kind of agree with Ryan. I think the word selfishness is morally charged, and that people generally have an interest to promote their own welfare. And I think that's kind of what we've been using the word selfish to mean in this conversation.
It seems callous to take advantage of people's needs and desires simply to make endless money.
Nicole, you've introduced another consideration about the morality of markets to do with the qualities of character, the virtues and vices that certain market behaviors reflect. When Matthew made this provocative statement that the purpose of business is selfishness, I think what I understood was not that the purpose is selfishness, the purpose is to promote the general welfare by increasing productivity in the long run, something like that, and that catering to self-interest and allowing companies to cater to self-interest is a way of enabling them to serve that greater good. So is there a third consideration that catering to selfishness, even in the name of promoting the general welfare, reflects bad character? Kevin, that's your argument as well?
I agree. I think that it might be okay to accept selfishness in some areas, but maybe not in all.